The third epistle of John. The elder, to the beloved Gaius, whom I love in truth. Beloved, I pray that all may go well with you, and that you may be in good health, just as it is well with your soul. I was overjoyed when some of the friends arrived and testified to your faithfulness to the truth, namely how you walk in the truth. I have no greater joy than this, to hear that my children are walking in the truth. Beloved, you do faithfully whatever you do for the friends, even though they are strangers to you. They have testified to your love before the church. You will do well to send them on in a manner worthy of God. For they began their journey for the sake of Christ, accepting no support from non-believers. Therefore, we ought to support such people so that we may become co-workers with the truth. I have written something to the church, but Diotrephes, who likes to put himself first, does not acknowledge our authority. So if I come, I will call attention to what he is doing in spreading false charges against us. And not content with those charges, he refuses to welcome the friends and even prevents those who want to do so and expels them from the church. Beloved, do not imitate what is evil, but imitate what is good. Whoever does good is from God. Whoever does evil has not seen God. Everyone has testified favorably about Demetrius, and so has the truth itself. We also testify for him, and you know that our testimony is true. I have much to write to you, but I would rather not write with pen and ink. Instead, I hope to see you soon, and we will talk together, face to face. Peace to you. The friends send you their greetings. Greet the friends there, each by name. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Thank you, Hope, and thank you for that welcome. It's lovely to be here. It's lovely to have the sunshine. It's lovely to be here on a beautiful day. It's lovely to see your beautiful, wonderful faces. So thank you. I have some reflections on that strange text, which is a good thing because you're probably wondering why that strange text. But first of all, we're gathered today for a healing service, and when we gather for a service like this, we don't come in a vacuum. We come, I'm going to suggest, shaped by a particular landscape, a landscape of healing, the world we live and work in. And so, as I was introduced, and I come as chief executive of a historic Anglican charity concerned with clergy and their families and their well-being. And we're here at Harnhill Centre in the year it's celebrating its 40th anniversary. And so this morning we might recognise that we're not alone in what we do here. We're part of a wider landscape of care, a landscape that includes churches and charities, clinicians and counsellors, communities and families, people and places seeking in different ways to attend to human healing and flourishing. And so, as I mentioned at the start, our text, it's probably before I go any further, it's worth saying a word about why 3 John? Why might it help us here? And I would suggest it helps us here because it too was written in a landscape of care, a landscape where relationships are under strain, where patterns of leadership are shifting, where authority is being contested, reworked, and in some cases quietly withheld or resisted. It's not a simple situation. It's a community living with complexity, tension, and anxiety. And what's striking is that the elder does not respond by closing things down, by asserting control, or by doubling down on position. Instead, he writes in a way that keeps things open. He names truth, but he also exercises care. He encourages faithfulness, but without collapsing the situation into something neat or easily resolved. And at the heart of it all, he grounds everything, not in role, not in authority, not in who is right, but in something much deeper. Beloved. And perhaps that is what makes this such a helpful text for us. It doesn't take us out of complexity, but it shows us how to remain open, how to act with courage and care in the midst of it, grounded not in asserting ourselves, but in remembering who we are, the beloved of God. And with that in mind, I'd like to name 4 features of the landscape of care we inhabit and place alongside each of them a word from this short letter. And the first is about relationships. We all live in systems that can very easily become instrumental. People can be seen in terms of need, function, diagnosis, or demand. They can be reduced to problems to be solved rather than persons to be encountered. Yet the landscape of care, I suggest we long for, is relational, not transactional. It resists reducing people to diagnoses or problems and insists on attending to the person and their story in their own terms. And into that, the elder writes, beloved. Before anything is asked of Gaius, before any issue is addressed, he is named as one who is loved. And that feels like a word for the church, a word that we need to recover, because if we begin with function, we will treat one another instrumentally. But if we begin with belovedness, then care becomes something else. Not fixing, not managing, not using one another for the purposes of the system, but honouring one another as those loved by God. The second feature of our landscape that I like to talk about is pace. Much of the world around us prizes efficiency, measurable outcomes, quick responses, visible effectiveness. Recent conversations I'd had at a conference on the ecologies of care, which brought together clinicians, ministers, and academics, sounded the alarm rightly on this kind of efficiency culture that can threaten relational attentiveness on which real care depends. Against that, we spoke about such things as Sabbath, slowness, interruption, attentiveness, each as counter practices, recognizing that meaningful care often emerges in waiting and listening. And when we turn to 3 John, we find not a command barked out under pressure, but a blessing. Beloved, I pray that you may be in good health and that all may go well with you, just as it is well with your soul. There is space in that. There is patience in that. There is no hint of frantic urgency. It seems to me that the elder models a kind of hospitality of soul, a way of addressing another person that makes room for their well-being rather than immediately pressing them into usefulness. And this is written through the letter. Even when the elder names what is difficult, he does so without escalating the language. And that's something that's clearer in the original Greek, and you probably could tell from Hope's wonderful reading that different texts translate these things slightly differently. But what is behind the translations that we have is the elder is de-escalating the language. He refuses to mirror the harshness that he has received. And at the end, I don't know if you noticed, he said something quite striking. I would rather not write. We will talk together. We'll meet face to face. It's why it's such a delight to travel down from Sheffield, to be with you, to meet face to face. I suggest there's a greatness there in the elder's words, a refusal to let the relationship be defined by urgency or conflict, and that too is part of this slower, more attentive way of caring. And perhaps that is part of the healing wisdom of this text, to ask whether our pace allows us to welcome, to attend, to bless, or whether we've become so hurried we can only process people. The third feature is exhaustion. One of the strongest themes, I'd suggest, in the landscape of care is that caregivers themselves need care. Those responsible for ministry, therapy, medicine, pastoral care often carry exhaustion and moral injury. We must guard ourselves against heroic or self-sacrificial models of leadership. And much of St. Luke's work and the work here at Harnhill rightly points towards practices such as prayer, supervision, reflection, retreat, and rhythms that sustain the carer as well as those cared for. And here, 3 John is again interesting because it gives us Diotrephes, a figure who appears to defend his own space, his own status, his own control. Should we give it a pause for the... Oh, no.
Maybe the Americans going there.
Well, that would be good news, indeed. So I was going to talk to you about Diotrephes, a character who defends his own space, his own status, and his own control. There's no reference to the nationality of the aircraft flying over at the moment. Now, that is not held up as wisdom, that is Diotrephes, quite the reverse. But it does alert us to something important. Not all boundary setting is healthy. There is a defended, anxious kind of boundary setting that shuts others out in order to preserve the self. Yet there is also such a thing as truthful limits. Limits that arise not from fear or the need to dominate, but from creatureliness, from the knowledge that we are not God. From the humility that knows we cannot carry everything. So perhaps the question here is not whether we have boundaries, but what kind of boundaries they are. Are they walls to be defended, or are they truthful limits that make space for shared care and for God? And the fourth feature I want to draw attention to is ecology, the wider environment in which care becomes possible. Going back to the Ecologies of Care conference, we repeatedly found ourselves recoiling from mechanistic models of care towards the image of a garden. Cultivation rather than control, accompaniment rather than fixing, creating the conditions for growth rather than imposing solutions. We spoke of attention to context, gradual growth, hospitality, beauty, play, lament, and spiritual practices that sustain healing. In other words, care isn't simply an act, it's an ecology, it's a climate, it's a way of inhabiting space with others and before God. And I think 3 John can help us here too, because underneath its tensions and personalities, it seems to ask, what kind of community are we becoming? A place of control, anxiety, and exclusion, or a place in which truth, welcome, and faithful presence can abide. The landscape of healing cannot be manufactured by force. It must be cultivated. It depends on practices of healthy and healing presence, and sometimes of healthy absence too, knowing when not to dominate, when to step back, when to allow space, when to trust that God is already at work. Because the burden of healing does not rest on us alone. We participate in it, but we do not control it. God is the one who ultimately heals, and care is held within that wider triangle of God, carer, and the cared for. So it seems to me that there are 4 tensions in the landscape we inhabit: relationships, instrumental or beloved; pace, efficiency or hospitality; exhaustion, defended boundaries or truthful limits; ecology, control or a place to abide. And alongside each of these, the elder offers not a technique, but a posture, a way of being, not beginning with assertion, but with blessing, not beginning with role, but with relationship, not beginning with control, but with belovedness. And perhaps that is where healing begins too. Not first in what we do for others, but in remembering who each of us are before God, the beloved. And if this is the landscape we inhabit, relationships that can become instrumental, pace that can become driven, exhaustion that can become hidden, and an ecology that can become controlling, then a question begins to surface. Not first, how do we care better for others, but more quietly and perhaps more uncomfortably, how are we ourselves being cared for? Because it is striking in this short letter that the elder does not begin with instruction. As I've said, he begins with a blessing, a prayer. Beloved, I pray that you may be in good health and that all may go well with you, just as it is well with your soul. Before anything is asked, Gaius, before any issue is addressed, the elder attends to his well-being. He attends to his health. He attends to his soul. He attends to him not as a function, not as a host, not as a supporter of the latest mission initiative, but as one who is loved. And that feels like a necessary word for those of us who find ourselves in one way or another as carers and those seeking care. Because there is that temptation in all forms of care to give out of a place that has not itself been replenished, to offer presence without attending to our own presence before God, to carry others without acknowledging what we ourselves are carrying. And over time that becomes unsustainable, not because we are failing, but because we are human. The landscape I've been describing reminds us of something simple. Those who cultivate life in others cannot remain untouched themselves. Those who make space for others need spaces where they too are held. And in the Christian life, that tending does not begin with technique. It begins with receiving something that we do not generate for ourselves. It begins with hearing, perhaps again, perhaps after a long time, that word, beloved. Not something we quickly pass on to others, but as something that is spoken to us personally, gently, persistently, because if we do not allow ourselves to be loved, when we try to earn what can only be received, we will try to earn what can only be received. If we do not allow ourselves to be held, we will try to hold everything. And if we do not attend to the health of our own souls, then sooner or later our care will become shaped by urgency or anxiety or depletion rather than by freedom. And so perhaps part of the invitation of this service is this: not simply to come with those we carry, but to come as those in need of care ourselves. Not simply as ministers or helpers or supporters, but as those who are first and last beloved of God. And that may require something of each of us. It may require letting go, even briefly, of the sense that we must be the ones who hold things together. It may mean allowing ourselves to be interrupted, not in our busyness, but in our self-understanding, to discover that we are not only those who care, but those who are also invited to receive it. Because the truth that runs through this letter and beneath this landscape of care is this: we are not the source of healing. We are participants in it, and participants must remain connected with the life from which that healing flows. Which is why the elder begins where he does. Not with urgency, not with demands, not with expectations, but with a prayer and with a name: beloved. And so as we continue in this time of prayer and healing together, perhaps the first thing we are invited to do is not to do anything at all, but to receive. To let that word be spoken over us. To allow ourselves to be seen, known, and held in the presence of God, and to know his peace. Peace to you. Amen.